Hi, I'm Arnie Gundersen from Fairewinds. Well, it's the end of 2011, and I thought I'd use this opportunity not to look back on the disasters of Fukushima, but to look forward into 2012 and try to give you an idea about what may be happening in the next 12 months. The way I see it, there's three main areas. The first is what's happening on the site. The second is the personal exposures to the people in Japan, especially Fukushima Prefecture. And the third is, where are they going to put all the radioactive waste? Well, the first topic is important to talk about today. On Friday, December 16th, the Japanese government declared that Fukushima had achieved what's called a cold shutdown. Now, specifically, here's what the Prime Minister said. He said, "A stable condition has been achieved, and we can consider the accident itself contained." Now, he wasn't the only one who said similar things. The International Atomic Energy Agency said, the IAEA welcomes the announcement of the government of Japan that the unit has achieved cold shutdown. And then interestingly, the next sentence is, the IAEA receives its information updates from a variety of official Japanese sources through the national competent authorities. And the third thing is the United States State Department. The State Department said, when they heard the announcement, "We in the United States government are very happy to hear the news. We believe the Japanese government has made the right choice toward recovery." Well, to me, this announcement sounds a little bit like George Bush on the deck of the aircraft carrier declaring that the mission has been accomplished. In fact, we all know how that turned out, and I think Fukushima is going down a very similar road. This is a long battle, and it's far from being over. On site, there's several things we need to talk about. And the first is the condition of the plant is really not stable. In engineering, we have a condition called equilibrium, and I'll use this mug as an example. If you stay right at the top of that mug, you won't fall off unless you move a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left. And that's called dynamic equilibrium. One false move and you roll off the side. If you stay in the bottom of the mug, if you move to the right or the left, you come back to the center. And that's called static equilibrium. That's where you want to be. That's what cold shutdown really is. Fukushima's up here in a dynamic equilibrium. It really should be down here in a static equilibrium. And that's a long way off. The biggest problem for the immediate future is the possibility of a severe aftershock earthquake. Tokyo Electric has calculated that if a severe earthquake hits, all of the jury-rigged piping that's in place will fail again, and within 40 hours we'll be back to a meltdown. Now that's hardly stable. The piping on the site, while important to keep the plant cool, is not seismically qualified. And of course we know that an aftershock is in fact likely. So problem number one for the Fukushima site is the possibility of an earthquake in the event of a seismic event. The other issue also relates to a seismic event, and that applies to Fukushima Unit 4. Now, Unit 4 doesn't have fuel in it. It has all the fuel in the fuel pool. And of course, the building is weakened dramatically from the explosions and fires. Now, I think that if a severe earthquake hits, it's actually my concerns with the spent nuclear fuel sitting out in the open in that Unit 4 fuel pool that have the gravest concern. And finally, on the issue of what's going on site, I'm very, very concerned about worker exposures. The exposures these people are registering are very, very high by international standards and even by national standards within Japan. And while no one will die immediately, I'm certain that they're all dramatically increasing their risk of cancer. They're brave men, and my hat's off to them, but it is a dramatic risk that they're all taking. The second area I have concern for 2012 is the exposure to the people in Japan from the radiation from Fukushima. It's important to remember that all of the calculations so far on personnel exposure are just that. No one was measuring in the first week and 2 weeks and first month. So all of these are based on lots of assumptions and are certainly very suspect. Now, the other issue is that these exposures are all external radiation. They're based on perhaps the cesium that's lying on the ground or the radiation that happens to be in the air. But they don't include the hot particles that people have breathed in. Now, there's one other thing. On the first day of the accident, in the first week of the accident, enormous clouds of radioactive gases, called noble gases, xenon and krypton, were released. And just about 2 weeks ago, the Japanese released data that showed that the concentration of radioactive gases in those clouds was 1,300 becquerels in a cubic meter. Now, that then went into people's lungs and gave them an internal exposure as well as being in a cloud that gave them an external exposure. That calculation is also incomplete. Well, let's talk a little bit about the hot particles. On the site, we've already given you Marco Kaltofen's presentation to the American Public Health Association. And you'll remember that the Fukushima air filters were loaded with radiation, and the Tokyo air filters weren't far behind. They would both be classified as radioactive waste here in the United States. Well, Mr. Kaltofen told the American Public Health Association that the rate at which a car pulls in air is very similar to the rate at which a lung brings in air, which means that the lungs of people in prefectures near Fukushima are as radioactive as the picture that Mr. Kaltofen presented to American Public Health. Now, what does that mean for you and I? We had another picture on the site, and it was a hot particle inside an ape lung. And the particle shows the damage to the lung caused by the decay of the radioactive material over a period of time. That's one hot particle. The people in Fukushima Prefecture and nearby prefectures have many more than one hot particle. And I think we can all expect that there'll be internal radiation damage as a result. In fact, Dr. Steve Wing's data that came after 3 Mile Island showed about a 10% increase in lung cancers 3 to 5 years after that accident. Well, what's the solution here for the Japanese? Well, the Japanese government has raised the standard and is proposing moving people back in to the exclusion zone. Now, what does that mean is that the Japanese government has established that it is safe to live in the exclusion zone if your exposure is less than 20 millisieverts. Now, in the American system, that's 2,000 millirem. To put that 2,000 millirem in perspective, I checked with the American Health Physics Society to find out what the average worker in an American nuclear plant gets in a year. The Health Physics Society says that the average worker in a nuclear plant gets 180 millirem of additional radiation in the course of a year. That's 10 times lower than what the Japanese government is proposing for its citizens going back into radioactive areas near Fukushima. Now, the American workers are being paid to take that exposure, whereas the Japanese are not. In other words, the risk has a benefit here in America, but the risk to the Japanese has no benefit for them. The third area I'd like to talk about is what are we going to do with all the nuclear waste? Now, we've already talked about the enormous amount of water that's being generated at the power plant and leaking into the ocean. Woods Hole and others have said that this has already released more radiation into the water, into the Pacific Ocean, than any other nuclear accident in history.